chief foreign editor, Rob Parsons, is joining me here on set to discuss the latest. Rob, I suppose the crucial question is 2 years after these huge demonstrations that rocked Iran, the launch of Women Life Freedom Movement, has the position of women in Iran improved?
Yeah, it's hard to say that it has. I mean, there was a moment 2 years ago, over a period of about 3 months from September to January 2023, when it really looked as though the regime was tottering. There were demonstrations right across the country, in places where normally you wouldn't expect to be very much political activity, like right down in the far southeast, for instance, not just the big cities like Tehran. And the demonstration had sort of morphed from being a protest about women's rights, the Women Life Freedom Movement, to a movement that challenged the authority of the supreme leader himself, Ali Khamenei. But through a policy of violence against the demonstrators, in which automatic rifle fire was used, hundreds were arrested, thousands were arrested, in fact, 550 people were killed, as you just pointed out. 19,200 were arrested. 10 people were sentenced to death and executed, the most recent of which just a few months ago. The regime succeeded in beating the opposition down. In part, the opposition's failings were self-inflicted. They failed to unite around common themes. Nationalists and monarchists and liberals were at each other's throats, and that made life easier for the government. But essentially, it was the brute force of the regime that managed to beat down the opposition and put it on the defensive. Ever since, so over the last year or so, we've seen an increase in attacks on women not wearing the veil, for instance, in public. Family members of those who were arrested in 2022 to 2023 harassed themselves. And the government, in the form of Ali Khamenei, the Supreme Leader, make it absolutely clear there will be no stepping back. As he put it, unveiling is both religiously forbidden and politically forbidden. That remains the position of the regime.
Could more change be on the way? Rob, let's not forget July this year, Masoud Pezeshkian elected as president of Iran. He's seen as a reformer, isn't he? Yes. But has his administration approved at this stage anyway improved the situation for women at the moment?
Hard to see that it has. Masoud Pezeshkian was elected in July of this year, an unexpected election, but his predecessor died in a helicopter crash. As you say, he campaigned as a reformer, and that raised some hopes, not great hopes, it has to be said, because there have been alleged reformer presidents in Iran before, and it's come to absolutely nothing, because real power resides with the supreme leader, not with the president. But he did campaign, among other things, for a loosening of the laws on wearing the veil or not wearing the veil in public. But in April, just before he was elected, a system called Nur, the light, was put in place to intensify the operations of the police against women not wearing the veil in public. He's done absolutely nothing, it would seem, to reverse that. Instead, these motorcycle groups of the police, sometimes on foot, sometimes in cars, have been harassing women to an even increased extent. And just going through Parliament now, there is a new bill called Support the Culture and Chastity of Hijab, which many see as a prelude to even more intensified repression of women. On the other hand, it is true that just a week ago, the Prosecutor General ordered the security services to show more restraint in their treatment of women who they encounter on the street who are not wearing the veil. Perhaps the authorities are trying to get some sort of balance, but overall, it seems that despite the election of an alleged reformer, the situation of women has not got any better at all.
Rob, it all does sound rather depressing, isn't it? I mean, 2 years ago, we had this big event. It led to mass protests, over 500 people killed, a lot more arrested. Yeah. But are women basically back to where they were before Mahsa Amini died?
Yeah, I mean, it is undoubtedly very depressing if you happen to be a woman living in Iran at the moment, because on the surface of things, in terms of legislation, it's not got any better at all. One could argue that it's got worse. But there has been, I think, an irrevocable change in the attitude of not just women, on the issue of things like wearing the or not wearing the veil in public, but also the attitude of society as a whole. There seems to have been an irrevocable change. The regime is still in power, but is in power through the use of essentially of brute force. It uses its coercive arm to keep society in place. It doesn't appear to have the support of society. I suppose the clearest evidence for that came in those elections that we were talking about just a moment ago in July, when Pezeshkian became president. The regime devoted enormous resources to trying to get a big turnout, and yet the turnout was the lowest in the history of the Islamic Republic of Iran. Just under 40% of the electorate turned out to vote. That is a real indictment of the regime. So, by and large, the regime has very little to offer. Women increasingly, in spite of the pressure on them, can be seen out on the streets, particularly after dusk, not wearing a veil, flaunting their decision to challenge the authority of the regime. And at the same time, the regime has very little to offer back. In terms of socio-economic achievement, nothing is moving forward. Inflation, unemployment, incredibly high, sanctions still in place, and the regime doesn't seem to be offering anybody a way forward to make life better, either for women as a separate group or a society as a whole.
Rob, thanks very much. Rob Parsons, our chief foreign editor here on France 24.